largest power, that's single locations that have a minimum peak demand of 2,000 kVA, and street lighting and other categories, down 6.7% and 44.5% respectively. The downturn in the street lighting category partially reflected the energy-saving effects of the increased use of LED bulbs for this purpose. Water consumption increased by 3.9%, reflecting higher consumption in both the Western Division, up 2.3%, and the Eastern Division, up 4.7%. The growth in water consumption was facilitated by increased water production, up 4.7%. Transport, storage, and communication. Real value added for the transport, storage, and communication industry contracted by an estimated 2.6%. This resulted from a decrease in the transport and storage component, due largely to lower levels of activities at the island's sea and airports, specifically maritime transport activities, reflecting a decline in cargo movement at the outports, down 0.9%, and Port of Kingston, down 34%. Air transport component, reflecting decreased passenger movements, was down 14.4%, due mainly to departures, down 11%, and arrivals, down 17.8%. Finance and insurance services. Real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.3% during the review quarter, reflecting increases in the net interest income on the stock of loans and advances, and fees and commission income. This industry also benefited from financial activities associated with the initial public offering of Trans-Jamaica Highway, the largest IPO on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, which raised $14.1 billion during the quarter. This reflects the government of Jamaica's continued commitment to the divestment of state-owned assets through the market to reduce the debt burden, while simultaneously expanding financial inclusion and access to all Jamaicans. The real value added in the wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, WR trim, industry was estimated to have remained flat. This performance was influenced by an increase in the employed labor force by 36,400 persons as at January 2020, estimated growth in agriculture and manufacturing activities, the impact of measures associated with the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, which reduced operational hours of businesses and restricted the movement of people. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry contracted by an estimated 13.9%, largely reflecting an estimated contraction in foreign national arrivals during the month of March, associated with the decision to close the borders to air travel to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. For the period January to February 2020, total stopover arrivals grew by 6% to 462,940 visitors. Total visitor expenditure for the 2-month period is also estimated to have increased by 5.9% to US $694.64 million, of which stopover visitor expenditure increased by 7.2% to US $656.3 million. However, data on total airport arrivals during the quarter indicate that there was a 17.9% decline during January to March 2020, largely reflecting the impact of the restrictions imposed locally and globally as a result of COVID-19. For the employment update, based on the labor force survey undertaken by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, for the month of January 2020, the unemployment rate was 7.3%. This was 0.7 percentage points lower than the rate recorded in January 2019. The number of persons employed increased by 36,400 persons relative to January 2019. There was an increase in the labor force by 29,300 persons to 1,369,500 persons due to the following factors: a natural decrease in the working age population by 600 persons. That is, there were 600 less persons within the age group 14 years and older, and a decline of 29,900 in the number of persons outside the labor force. An examination of the employed labor force by industry group as at January 2020 revealed that 11 of the 16 industry groups recorded higher employment levels. The largest increases in employment were recorded for wholesale and retail trade, up 12,600 persons, real estate renting and business activities, up 8,900 persons, and hotels and restaurants, up 4,800 persons. GDP performance for fiscal year 2019-20. For fiscal year 2019-20, real GDP is estimated to have grown by 0.1%. The heavier weighted services industry was estimated to have grown by 0.7%, which outweighed a contraction in the goods producing industry, which declined by 1.4%. The industries which remained recorded the largest growth during the fiscal year were finance and insurance services, up 3%, manufacturing, up 2.8%, and agriculture, forestry, and fishing, up 2.4%. These outturns were outweighed by declines recorded for mining and quarrying, down 22.9%, construction down 1.8%, and hotels and restaurants down 1%. For the short-term economic outlook, looking at April to June 2020 and fiscal year 2020 to 2021. For April to June 2020, growth prospects for the economy are generally negative based on the anticipated impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to a fall in demand for goods and services amidst the full rollout of measures to contain the spread of the virus. To date, over 5.5 million COVID-19 cases have been confirmed globally, many of which are from economies of Jamaica's main trading partners. The US, Jamaica's main trading partner, accounts for the majority of the confirmed cases globally, followed by Brazil, Russia, and the United Kingdom. This will have significant impact on external demand for Jamaica's goods and services. Measures including the closure of Jamaica's borders to passenger traffic, restrictions on operating hours, as well as physical distancing protocols have negatively impacted key drivers of economic activities, such as hotels and restaurants, manufacturing, transportation, entertainment, and construction services. Spillover effects are also expected to be felt in related areas, such as wholesale and retail trade and finance. In addition, the continued contraction in the mining and quarrying industry due to the closure of the Gisco Alpart alumina refinery in September 2019 will exacerbate the negative impact on economic growth. The construction industry will be negatively impacted due to a downturn in new startups, as well as the halting of some ongoing projects during the period. With respect to the electricity and water industry, data for April 2020 has indicated that electricity consumption has fallen by 6% due to lower electricity sales in all categories except residential, which grew by 15.2%. This is partially attributed to the implementation of the daily curfew, work from home, and Tanaya Yard initiatives during the period. All other customer categories recorded contractions in sales ranging from negative 11.1% to negative 45.7%. This outturn is expected to continue until these initiatives have ended. For the water component, data for April 2020 indicate that consumption increased by 5.8%. This performance can be attributed to a general increase in the use of water for sanitization purposes in both residential and commercial establishments, as well as the stay-at-home protocol, which resulted in increased water usage at home. With respect to tourism activities, a sharp decline in stopover and cruise passenger arrivals is anticipated during the April to June 2020 quarter. This sector is therefore expected to record the most severe contraction in activities in areas including transportation, attractions, entertainment, and hotel and restaurant services. In light of the foregoing, it is projected, as at today, that the economy will contract within the range of -12% to -14% during the April to June 2020 quarter. This projection is based on information and expectations to date, which are very fluid and will change as new information becomes available. The extent of the decline is contingent on how soon the initiatives to boost economic recovery activities become effective in Jamaica and its main trading partners. For fiscal year 2020-2021, the key assumptions underpinning current projections for economic performance are: 1, there will be no major second phase outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in Jamaica and globally, and that the rate of contagion will remain within manageable bounds of the health sector's capacity. 2, there will be a gradual relaxation of measures that restrict the movement of persons as countries gauge its impact on the spread of the virus. 3, there will be lower international and domestic demand associated with an increase in unemployment rates, as some firms will take longer to reopen. And 4, all schools and educational institutions will resume operations by September 2020. And 5, there will be a return to growth performance during the January to March quarter of 2021. The economic projection for fiscal year 2020-2021 is for a contraction within the range of 4% to 6%. The services industry will record a significant share of this decline, particularly in the hotels and restaurants, other services, and the transport, storage, and communication industries. With regard to external demand, despite no restrictions on merchandise trade movements, Jamaica is expected to be impacted by the downturn in global economic performance, as key trading partners are projected to record contractions in output. Other anticipated areas of adverse impact during 2020 may include increasing unemployment and underemployment levels, inconsistent or reduced income streams, including revenue and remittance flows, risks to standards of living, including the ability to consume goods and services, the risk of poverty. Some families have experienced the reality of a thin line between their employment, their job or livelihood, and the immediate is a significant reduction in their ability to earn and consume goods and services. We also remind the country to be mindful of the fact that our society is characterized as an aging population and would therefore be at a greater risk from the effects of COVID-19, given the prevalence of comorbidities within this segment of the population. As we look at the upside potential and downside risks to our forecast, the main downside risks to the forecast presented include: 1, slower than anticipated restart of economic activities in key industries due to supply side constraints. 2, adverse weather conditions, particularly on the agricultural activities. 3, the advent of a second round of contagion due to the relaxation of measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. And 4, slower than anticipated restart of the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners, which will negatively impact external demand. And 5, increased factory downtime associated with aged production plants, as well as lower commodity prices, which make it unprofitable to produce. The pace of economic growth could, however, be enhanced if the following upside potential are realized. 1. Stronger than anticipated global demand associated with an early rebound in global economic activities. 2. Faster than anticipated recovery of key industries due to the effective channeling of domestic demand to sustain productive activities, especially in the agriculture, manufacturing, and hotels and restaurants industries. 3. Faster than expected recovery in local demand as firms rehire workers that previously lost jobs, or increases in numbers of hours for workers whose hours were reduced. And 4. Stronger domestic linkages as local firms satisfy local and global demand, which were previously fulfilled by the global supply chain. Looking now at our Vision 2030, Jamaica, the National Development Plan, in terms of an update, Jamaica's National Development Planning Framework is geared towards the achievement of our national goals and the global goals to which we have committed, and forms the framework for our participation in global agreements and forums on development. Jamaica remains committed to pursuing the long-term goals articulated in Vision 2030 Jamaica, the National Development Plan. However, in the face of COVID-19, strategic actions required in the medium to long term to realize our goals and maintain that path will require review and revision. This includes revisiting the development targets up to 2030 and the period or schedule for achieving these planned outcomes and our national development goals. This process has commenced with government-led strategic actions and plans from various sectors, including program revisions and reviews, in an effort to adapt to the challenges, shocks, and risks presented by the global pandemic. We are not yet in a position to present revised long-term development targets. However, from the PIOJ's preliminary review of the development targets under Vision 2030 Jamaica, it is anticipated that based on projections for the Jamaican and wider global society and economy, there will be slippages in several indicators. These include real gross domestic product, GDP, annual growth rate, and nominal GDP per capita, the unemployment rate, and poverty prevalence rates. To be noted, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Jamaica, in its pursuit of Vision 2030 Jamaica, had entrenched macroeconomic stability, evidenced by low unemployment and inflation rates, a declining debt-to-GDP ratio, and 7 consecutive years of economic growth. Also, Jamaica has been strengthening its capacity for disease surveillance, mitigation, and risk reduction, and the responsiveness of the health system in advancing the achievement of a healthy and stable population, which has served as a key tenet of Jamaica's public health response to COVID-19. However, COVID-19 has demonstrated how quickly a path of growth can be challenged. Jamaica's capacity to identify the necessary strategic adjustments under Vision 2030 Jamaica will improve as more data, statistics, and information become available from research and consultations within partnership frameworks, including the multi-stakeholder committees established by the government to inform the program of economic recovery. So in conclusion, the preliminary data presented on performance for the January to March 2020 quarter indicate that the economy has begun to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and restrictive measures implemented to tackle the pandemic locally and globally, evidenced by an estimated contraction of 1.7%. This outturn would result in an estimated fiscal year 2019-2020 growth of 0.1%, down from the previous forecast for growth of 0.6%. Going forward, quarterly economic contractions are anticipated, at least for the remainder of calendar year 2020, with a return to growth performance projected for the January to March quarter of 2021. However, the uncertainty regarding the depth, as in the extent of spread of infection, and the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic poses the main downside risk to this projection. These developments would bring GDP performance for fiscal year 2020-2021 to a contraction within a range of -4% to -6%, the weakest economic performance in almost 4 decades. That is, since a contraction of 4.6% was recorded in 1985. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, several initiatives focusing on the provision of strategic advice on policy, plans and programs to the government towards the sustainable recovery of the country from the fallout of COVID-19 has begun. Emphasis is being placed on providing analysis on economic, social, environmental, as well as external cooperation management issues, underpinned by an appreciation of the interlinkages for sustainable development outcomes. This work is being supported by the extensive network of partners for development, including the public and private sectors, the international development partners, and civil society. These initiatives include 1, the CARE program, led by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, which involved the collection of data, preliminary impact assessment, and the design and provision of GOJ assistance to mitigate the negative impact on the economy through sustaining domestic demand. This stimulus effort is similar to developments globally, where governments provide temporary assistance to the most vulnerable groups in the society. 2, the Economic Recovery Task Force, led by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, which is aimed at developing strategies and policy initiatives to kickstart the economic recovery process. 3, the National COVID-19 Research Agenda, led by the Ministry of Health and Wellness and Statin, which focuses on measuring and monitoring the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 in order to provide timely information and data to policymakers in devising strategies on the way forward. And 4, the Post-Disaster Impact Assessment, using the Damage and Loss Assessment, DALA, and/or the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment methodologies. A comprehensive quantification and description of total damage and losses will be undertaken to determine the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and society, to inform the government's policy or program interventions during the recovery phase. So far, the core team has been activated and data collection instruments have been disseminated and reviewed. The monitoring and collection of baseline data is already in process. Finally, the duration of this disease COVID-19, is unknown, and therefore measures must be put in place to facilitate the effective, though restrained, operation of the economy and society. We have entered into a period of significant challenges, the likes of which have never been experienced in several decades. Jamaica requires all available resources to work in tandem to overcome the challenges being faced at this time. It requires a whole-of-society approach, the public and private sectors, civil society, the young and the old. I therefore encourage us all to maintain our collaborative effort and to remain disciplined and responsible as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. God bless us all. Thank you very much.
DG, I understand that the section on restaurant, we had lost the feed. Can you repeat that section?
On hotels and restaurants?
Yes.
I'll ask them to give me the page reference quickly. Page 13. Okay. Just that section alone? And you got it back on employment? The jobs were recovered? It's a bad joke. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry contracted by an estimated 13.9%, largely reflecting an estimated contraction in foreign national arrivals during the month of March, associated with the decision to close the borders to air travel to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. For the period January to February 2020, total stopover arrivals grew by 6% to 462,940 visitors. Total visitor expenditure for the 2-month period is also estimated to have increased by 5.9% to US $694.64 million, of which stopover visitor expenditure increased by 7.2% to US $656.3 million. However, data on total airport arrivals during the quarter indicate that there was a 17.9% decline during January to March 2020, largely reflecting the impact of the restrictions imposed locally and globally as a result of COVID-19.
Thank you, DG. We will now take your questions. Please use the raise hand icon to be identified. After you have been identified, please give your name and organization that you're representing. Are there any questions?
Question coming?
Question is coming.
So again, as we close,
I have Siobhan Campbell. Mr. Campbell, you may go ahead with your question.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning, Director General. My question is a two-part one. This projection for the fiscal year, has this taken into account the adjustments made to the budget at the last call just the last week? And if so, has this also taken into account the changes to the capital expenditure over the next 2 fiscal years?
Right, so thank you, Siobhan. So yes, they have taken into account the recent changes to the budget, and they have informed our analysis, part of that analysis. Thank you for your question.
Let's see, there's another question coming. Nicole Adamson. Ms. Adamson, you may go ahead with your question.
Good morning, Nicole Adamson from BM Wealth Management. My question relates to the tourism industry. I'm not sure if when you had shipped out, you spoke to the outlook for tourism for the fiscal year 2020-2021, and if you had any numbers on what that growth is expected to look like. And also, do you have a take on what inflation might look like over the coming year? Thank you.
So thank you, Nicole. And so we said for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021, this current fiscal year, the outlook is anticipated a projection for outturn that is negative, between -4% and -6%. And so within that range. And so we said we anticipate, even during the year, we said leading up to the remainder of the calendar year, we would see negative outturns in terms of GDP growth, and expect growth to return overall in the January to March 2021 quarter. We said we anticipate that, given the nature of the industry, that the hotels and restaurants industry, the tourism industry, remember we look at hotels and restaurants on the numbers, which is a large proportion of what is done in the overall tourism industry, but we think that will be the hardest hit, one of those hardest hit in the intermediate term. And as we know, there are quite a bit of activities for the safe reopening and resumption of the sector. And you've been hearing the updates on that coming through the Economic Recovery Task Force. So that's our outlook as we see it. In terms of inflation, Nicole, then we allow those who calculate and monitor and watch in terms of the Bank of Jamaica, and they would continue to give reports on that. So we defer that to them. And so, as we said, we anticipate the restore forecasts, of course, remain. We've said we don't know quite the duration of the pandemic in terms of, and then impact in terms of spread. We anticipate you have the upside, we've said the downside, that if you have a second round, that would be a downside. But the upside is that if we could recover, resume quickly in a global context, that our other jurisdictions of our main trading partners are able to do the same in terms of safe and quick recovery, then of course there would have been an upside to what we are forecasting. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, DG. Siobhan, you may go ahead with your question. Siobhan, your question, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Regarding the 2030 development goals, as you said, there's going to be a review, but I'm curious, does this or would this entail a delay in the meeting of some of these 2030 targets, or are we suggesting that how we achieve them is what's going to be adjusted?
So thank you, Siobhan. That's a good question, and I think it would entail both. It could speak to a delay, and depending on the target, it's a wide range, as you know, of targets and indicators, and then how we achieve it. So it's going to speak to both. But let me invite the head of Vision 2030, Ms. Pisha Bryan, just to speak to some of that also, please.
Good morning. In regard to the 2030 targets, as our Director General has said, we would be taking an approach of looking at both. There are some targets that we have actually been highly on track, and some that we have actually very, very much almost reached the target. In one area, we have actually surpassed the target already, the 2030 target, and we were already looking at strategic adjustments to respond to that. So there are areas in which we will be able, we think, based on what we're seeing now, and the situation could change, still stay on track. But of course, we still have to do strategic adjustments even in those areas. But there are areas that we were already struggling in, and that we were already looking at whether or not we would have to revise those targets. And for this fiscal year, oddly enough, we had planned that exercise, that we were going to review those 2030 targets to see which targets realistically could be achieved in 2030, and then if not, when they would be achieved. Please note, however, that missing individual targets does not mean that the country does not advance in development, because that is one of the conversations we often have. Maybe we don't get to all the tenets of developed country status, but we can get to some significant milestones that take us there. So the strategic framework will have to be adjusted, and targets will have to be reviewed, and the timelines changed accordingly. Lastly, I must say, though, that we are thinking at the PIOJ beyond 2030. And so, whereas Vision 2030 Jamaica and the Sustainable Development Goals have a timeline of 2030, we have begun the conversation beyond 2030 because Jamaica's development does not end there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Pisha.
DG, this is a question from someone on YouTube. What's the gravity of the impact on tax collections for FY 2020-2021?
Okay, again, no, so something on the tax revenue and tax collections, you'll hear and have been hearing updates from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. The Minister himself chairs the Economic Recovery Task Force, so he's been reporting on that. So we'll continue to defer and allow him to do that and for the Ministry to do that.
Thanks, DG. Are there any other questions from the media? No.
All right, so we just want to continue to encourage us to maintain our collaborative effort. It's going to require and call for this whole of society approach. I think you've heard the Prime Minister giving relatively high marks for our response. It's a whole of country, whole of society response. We want to encourage us to remain disciplined, to remain responsible in our actions and in our responses. Someone says crisis is an opportunity for genius to emerge. And so I just want to encourage us to be hopeful and to continue to give up our best efforts as we continue to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Let me hand back over to Mrs. Marcia Blake Hall. Thank you.
Thanks, DG. Please note that the slides and presentation will be uploaded to the PIOJ website and linked to our social media pages. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for participating. Please join us again in mid-August when we will present on the April to June 2020 quarter. Have a good afternoon.
Well done, well done.
Yes.